Listen, before you doubt this story, ask yourself, what do you do when the sea gives you a gift with no explanation? On the night this story begins, the coast lay under a sky scrubbed clean of clouds. No wind moved, no storm gathered, and yet the tide that had obeyed the moon since before any of your grandmothers were born, pulled back. Not the ordinary retreat of morning low water, it kept going. Miles, it bared reef flats no living eye had seen, exposed the pale ribs of ships swallowed 100 years before, and opened the black gaping mouth of a trench that has no business meeting open air. The old ones say the earth has a memory older than salt. That night the earth remembered something, and it made the water flinch backward to get away from it. But the people of the coast did not read it as memory, they read it as fortune. Children ran barefoot onto ground that had been ocean floor an hour before, and their laughter rang out over wet sand glittering with things the sea had kept hidden. Coins gone green with age, the curved white horn of a creature no fisherman could name, shells the size of a grown man's fist. Mothers filled baskets. Old men who had fished this water their whole lives stood at the edge of the new shoreline and told each other it was a blessing, the sea for once giving back more than it took. Not one of them asked the only question that mattered: where does water go when it does not simply evaporate into the sky? It does not vanish, it gathers, far out past where any lamp could reach, past where courage or curiosity dared to follow. The horizon was no longer a line, it was rising, slowly at first, the way a held breath rises before it becomes a shout. Then faster still, until the calm black water in the distance stopped looking like water at all and started looking like a wall standing up to its full and terrible height. This is not a story about a storm. There was no storm. There was only patience finally spent. And when patience like that finally moves, my friend, it does not knock. It does not warn twice. It comes as a wall, and it comes for everyone standing on ground that was never, not for one single day, actually theirs to keep. To understand why the sea finally answered, you must go back further than any king, further than any kingdom, back to when there was no dry ground to stand a kingdom on at all. In that first age, there was only water, and water belonged to one voice alone. Olokun was not a ruler the way your kings are rulers. She did not sit above her territory, she was her territory. Every current, every depth, every silence between one wave and the next belonged to her because there was nothing else for it to belong to. Then Obatala came down. He descended on a chain of his own making, carrying a small covered snail shell, a white hen, and a palm full of earth. Such a small, humble thing to change the shape of the world forever. He scattered that earth across her water. He set the white hen loose to scratch and scatter it wider still. And where it landed, land grew, spreading, hardening, rising until it could hold the weight of the first tree and then the first foot. Obatala did not think of this as theft. Gods rarely do. Standing on his new-made ground, feeling forests take root under his hands and palaces rise from nothing at his word, he thought only, finally, something worthy of a god who shapes. He never once asked what he was standing on. He never once knelt at the water's edge and asked its oldest voice for permission. Why would he? He had solved the ache of empty water with a small handful of earth. In his mind, he had given the world a gift. He had no memory of taking anything from anyone because he never once looked down long enough to see her there. But debts do not require the debtor's memory. They only require someone still counting. Every shrine built at a river mouth. Every harbor dug into what had once been a quiet, sacred cove. Every fisherman who lifted his catch to the sky and thanked the earth god for a gift that had, in fact, swum up from Olokun's own dark water. These were small debts, paid to the wrong god, one prayer at a time, for longer than any nation has kept written history. Small, that is the word humanity used. Olokun, in the dark, kept a different word for the same thing, numerous. A debt uncollected does not stay silent forever. It sends notice. The question is only whether anyone still knows how to read it. The first notice came to the wells. Overnight, no rain, no flood, no reason any well digger could name. Coastal wells miles inland turned the color of weak tea and tasted of salt and rust. Women drawing water at dawn spat it out and called for the elders. The elders sniffed it, tasted it, frowned, and said the earth was merely shifting, the way old earth does. Should the sea speak in a language humanity had long since forgotten how to hear, would you recognize it as speech at all, or would you call it only weather, and go back to your morning fire? The second notice came to the birds. At the exact hour the wells first turned, every seabird nesting on the northern cliffs rose at once. Not in ones and twos, but as a single black cloud tearing itself off the rock face, screaming, scattering inland in a panic no storm had ever caused before. For 3 full days not one bird returned to nest. The fishermen noticed. The fishermen always notice first, because the sea is the only god who has ever spoken honestly to them. The third notice did not whisper. It walked, on 2 old feet, straight into Obatala's own court. An old priestess, her back bent from decades of service, her hands trembling not from age but from what she had seen, carried a plain clay jar up the palace steps. Inside it, sea water gone the deep, wrong color of drying blood. She held it out with both hands, the way you offer something you are afraid to be holding. The ocean, she said, her voice barely above the wind, is not merely restless. I believe it is dying. Or worse, I believe it is done being patient. Obatala did not even take the jar from her hands. He tipped it himself, poured its rust-colored water onto his own white stone floor, and let it seep away between the cracks like something beneath his notice. The land, he told her, already turning, already certain the conversation was finished, does not answer to the sea. He was already 3 steps gone before her silence caught up to him. He never saw her face. If he had, he might have recognized the exact expression Olokun wore, alone in her cave, watching her last few worshippers turn their prayers towards stone instead of water. The face of someone who has just understood, completely and finally, that they will not be warned a 4th time. What came next did not arrive like weather, it arrived like a decision. Beneath the water, in the dark trench that had cradled her since before the first sunrise, Olokun did not summon a storm. She simply stopped holding herself back. Picture a fist that has been closed so long the knuckles have forgotten how to open, and then, all at once, they do. The ocean floor tore itself apart in a single breath, not a crack. An uncoiling, the way a serpent that has been sleeping, coiled for 10,000 years, finally, stretches its full and terrible length. Water did not simply rise, it climbed, it poured uphill, over ground that had never once in all of history felt spray on it, as though gravity itself had agreed, just this once, to look the other way. In the greatest of the coastal kingdoms, built of all places, closest to the very cove Olokun had once called sacred, the king stood on his own walls and watched the horizon become a wall of its own. He had heard the old stories. He did not believe them enough to leave. Stone has never failed him before, he told himself. Stone will not fail him now. Seal the gates, he roared, and his soldiers threw their full weight against timber reinforced with bronze, timber that had held back every ordinary tide for 6 generations. The gates held. For one surge they held, and for one single held breath, the entire city believed they had survived. The second surge did not ask the gates to move. It went through them, through the timber, through the bronze, through 6 generations of certainty, and it did not stop at the gates. It swept the market clean of its stalls and its silk and its songs. It climbed the palace steps 2 at a time, the way a conqueror climbs steps he has already decided belong to him. And when it finally reached the throne room itself, the room where kings had sat for 100 years believing height alone made them safe. The water did not destroy it. It simply arrived and kept arriving until the throne looked out over open ocean with nothing left standing between it and the horizon at all. Somewhere on a new mountain his own hands had ripped from the earth that same night, Obatala watched cities he had built from nothing disappear beneath water he had never once respected, and understood, far too late for it to matter, that this was not a disaster to outbuild. A god can raise 1,000 mountains, he cannot raise one that outruns a debt. When even the sacred groves went under, the last dry ground where Olokun's oldest worshippers still remembered her name, the gods finally did what they should have done at the very first strange well, the very first fleeing bird. They sent for Orunmila. He did not arrive with an army or a weapon or even a raised voice. He arrived on foot, at the edge of a flood that had already swallowed kingdoms, carrying nothing but chains, hand-forged, heavy, gold. Not gold as decoration, gold as memory. Every single link had been struck and inscribed with one of the warnings humanity had chosen not to hear. The brackish well, the fleeing birds, the rusted jar, centuries of small debts, finally given weight and shape. He did not come to defeat her. Gold does not defeat an ocean. He came to do the one thing no one, not Obatala, not a single king, not one single priest in 10,000 years had ever thought to do. He came to acknowledge her. Standing before a wave tall enough to end every story that had ever been told on that coast, Orunmila spoke her name aloud, and then he spoke every debt after it, one by one, in front of every god who had ever dismissed her as weather. He named the wells, he named the birds. He named the priestess with the rusted jar, and the 7 nights the water refused to lie still before anyone bothered to ask why. For the first time in the entire history of the world, someone answered Olokun instead of building over her. The wave did not crash. Ask yourself what it takes to make a fury that old choose to fold instead of finish what it started, because that is exactly what happened next. Slowly, almost gently, the water curled back down into the trench it came from, dragging her with it, bound, yes, but for the first time, heard. Today, if you walk that coast at dawn, you will see the fishermen do something their grandfathers began the very next morning. They lay their first catch of the day on the reef line before they keep a single fish for themselves, not from fear alone, from memory. Because somewhere beneath the waves, in the dark she has always called home, the owner of the silence is still counting. And the next time patience like that runs out, there may not be a golden chain or an Orunmila anywhere close enough to answer in time.